I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to stand up here and preach, and I was afraid that Aaron would have to do another Saturday night special for you. I know that I did rob you of that treat, but hopefully you can all forgive me. But I am 22 years old, and before I put the thermometer in my mouth, the days leading up to it, having to leave work early, having to put in my PPTO for work, calling my boss, telling, hey, I can't come in today. I was taking allergy relief before bed, gargling with warm salt water, and I know that if I did that when I was a kid, I would not be as good as I am right now, because I would always have to tell my mom, Mom, my throat hurts, I'm sick, and then she would say, oh, take this before bed, gargle with warm salt water. No, I don't want to do that. And I would do the exact opposite of it. Raise your hand if you can relate to that. Raise your hand if you can relate to doing the exact opposite of what your parents tell you to do. Everyone can relate to that? Okay, here's an easy one. Raise your hand if you cannot relate to that. Honest soul, honest soul. I don't know about the generations before me, but the generation I was born in, Generation Z, I remember being a little kid and being told to clean my room and just not doing it, just doing the exact opposite of it. It's like being told to not touch the hot stove, but taking your full palm and just touching it just right on the stove. And then you immediately regret it later. I was a weird kid. I was young and naive, but that was whenever I was younger. Right now, I'm a lot better. Obviously, as I told you, I listen to people. I know what they have to say because they're older, they're wiser, they know what they're doing. So if they tell me to not touch the hot stove, then I trust them. If they tell me to gargle with warm salt water, then I trust them because they've gone through it. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. Another thing that happened to me when I was a kid is that I loved parks. I didn't listen to my parents that much, did the opposite, and I loved parks. One year for Memorial Day, my mom took me, my brother, my sister around to the cemeteries to put flowers on all our relatives. And there was one spot, one cemetery where there was a park about 200 feet away. And as soon as we turned into the cemetery, I was just looking towards that park. I was just looking at it because I loved parks. I saw a swing set. I saw a merry-go-round. I was like, yes, I have to go there. So I asked my mom, Mom, can I go to the park? No, Harrison, we gotta finish this up. It's gonna be a long day today. Oh. She said no, but as you know, younger Harrison didn't listen very well. So as soon as she put the car in park and stepped out, went to the grave, I immediately unbuckled my seats, passed my brother, jumped over my sister, literally fell out of the van, and started running towards that park. It was like a jailbreak at that moment, because I knew that I was going to be in so much trouble. I had no idea what I was thinking, but that was just the shenanigans for younger Harrison. Running to that park, being told no, but still doing it anyway. Thankfully, I have grown out of that, so you don't want to see me run to a park. I don't do that anymore. I tell you these stories of myself not just to make my sermon longer, not just as a segue into the lesson at hand, but also to share a little more about myself. Another thing about me is that I like to make jokes, obviously at the beginning. I made a joke. It wasn't part of this. Just said it on the fly. And because I like to make jokes, that also means that I also like satire. If you don't know what satire is the use of exaggeration, irony, humor, or ridicule to point out the shortcomings or even vices in society. Some satires in popular media is Saturday Night Live, Animal Farm, Fight Club, Hard Times, and those are just 4 of many, many satires that we have in media right now. Now, these examples that I gave use exaggeration, irony, humor, ridicule. I tell you this because this leads into my segue into what we're reading. And as you can tell by that video that I thought was going to be longer, we are looking at Jonah. So if you all would open up your Bibles to Jonah 1, that is where we're going to be reading. I mentioned the story of me running off to the playground because I did the opposite of what my mom told me to do. Don't go to the park. We'll be short. This will be quick. We got a long day ahead of us. Do not run to that park. And so, obviously, I did that. I ran to the park. Jonah also did the exact same thing. Not the exact same thing. He didn't run to a park. But he did the exact opposite of what he was told to do. I mentioned satire because this book, Jonah, all 4 chapters of this book is a satire. Jonah 1. Jonah is a minor prophet, and there are major prophets and minor prophets. The only difference between major and minor prophets is not the achievements of the prophet themselves, but literally just the length of it. Jonah has 4 chapters in it, so obviously it's going to be a minor prophet. Jonah is one of 12 minor prophets and is quite important when it comes to prophets themselves. We need to listen to God and we need to listen good. Don't shy away when God calls on you. Now let's get into the good God and read Jonah 1, starting in verse 1. The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. But Jonah got up and went the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. Now, whenever I was reading this, I originally pronounced Tarshish as Tarnish. So as I was rehearsing this and practicing it, I would always have to enunciate Tarshish. So thankfully, I didn't say Tarnish because that would have been embarrassing. God spoke to Jonah in his own way. He told him to do 2 things. The first one was to go to Nineveh. And the second was to cry out against it. Now, Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire and was a large and prominent city in its day. And it was not a holy city, not like Israel. So God told this man to get up and go to this pagan city and rebuke its people because their sin was so bad. God wanted this man to go there and tell the people of Nineveh to repent because it was horrible there. We need to understand that God is omniscient. That omni word that I said is one of many that God is. Omniscient means all-knowing. God is all-knowing. We are not hidden from God. Our sin is not hidden from God. He sees it all. Now, God calling a man to stop this madness means that Nineveh is Sin City. You think Las Vegas is Sin City, just go to Nineveh. Although they don't have a lot of gambling there, I bet. Their slot machines would be a bit prehistoric. There may be 1 or 2 Elvis impersonators, but what do I know? But instead of Jonah listening to God, he went the opposite direction. Maybe because Jonah knew how bad Nineveh was. Maybe because he didn't want the Assyrians to escape God's wrath, God's judgment. Or maybe because he just didn't want to preach in that city. Instead, Jonah went the other direction to Tarshish, which is a city associated with ships and close to the water. Scholars do not know the exact location of Tarshish, but it's most closely associated with the southwest region of Spain, which in that time is as far west as you could go. Nineveh was to the east, and Tarshish was to the west. Now, another omni word God is omnipresent. Omnipresent means all present or everywhere. God is omnipresent. God is everywhere. Our sin is not hidden from God, and we are not hidden from God. When I would get in trouble, like many other kids when I was very young, I would go into my room and hide. I would usually hide under the covers, but I would leave a hole for my mouth so that way I can breathe, because whenever my blanket is just over my mouth, it's hard to breathe. Although you can hear me better, so I don't know if I should continue preaching like this or if I should just continue like this. Although I can use my hands more. I thought that was a pretty good hiding spot until I got nephews, and they did the exact same thing. And as soon as I saw a big human-shaped lump under the covers, I was like, yup, that's my nephew. He's not fooling anyone. It doesn't matter if you hide in the closet, in the bathroom, under the blankets, under your bed. Travel as far west as you can. God is always with you. He knows where you are. So Jonah thinking he could hide and get away was futile and quite humorous. And that is where the satire comes in. Jewish readers back in the day would find this funny because he's running away from God to the west. And what is also funny is that Jews were not very good at sailing. They were not very good sailors. So this Jew running towards a boat would be like a cat in a dog show. That is funny. That is ironic. This man running from God by getting on a boat thinks that he is smart, thinks that he can hide away from God by getting on a boat. In your spiritual life, which direction are you running? Whenever God calls you to go to Nineveh, are you going to Nineveh? Are you going to Tarshish? Are you getting on a boat because you think that's better than going to Sin City? Are you running towards God, away from God, next to, behind? Are you running? Are you walking? Are you sprinting? Are you hopping, skipping? We hear about our walk with God a lot in church. And the best way to describe that is to visualize it. And the way I visualize my walk with God is a dirt path in the woods. There are trees, there are branches in the path, there are roots, rocks. I think of that path as God's plan for us. We can choose to follow that path and be with God, or we can go as far off the path as we can. Sometimes a lot of people are 50-50. 1 foot on the path, 1 foot off the path. And so they're in this comfortable spot right here where they're lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. Whenever things get hard, they can just jump right back on the path and be with God, talk with God, worship God. And then when things get comfortable, they can just step back off it again. A lot of people do that because they feel like that's a comfortable spot. Maybe that's what Jonah did. Maybe that's why he didn't go to Nineveh. But let's continue on with the rest of this chapter. Jonah ran away from the Lord and went on a ship that turned out to be the exact opposite of what he thought. Jonah 1, verse 4. But the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help and threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But all this time, Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. So the captain went down after him. "How can you sleep at a time like this?" he shouted. "Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives." Then the crew cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods and caused this terrible storm. When they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. Why has this awful storm come down on us? They demanded. Who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality? If Jesus can calm storms, you bet that God can cause them. The sailors on board were in a dangerous situation. It was the typical wrong place, wrong time scenario. The storm didn't happen because the sailors were digging up the Ark of the Covenant. The sailors weren't in trouble because they have a gold coin from One-Eyed Willie's treasure. The storm didn't happen because of all of that, but because Jonah was on board and was asleep during all of this. When Jonah got on that boat, he might have thought that he got off scot-free, but that was wrong, that he was sorely mistaken. The sailors, on the other hand, were throwing things overboard, trying to lighten the load so that way they can continue to float and won't sink. And they cried out to their gods, which was futile because it was just empty words. But while these sailors were doing this, Jonah was asleep. I don't know if I can still do this now as 22 years old, but whenever I was a kid, I could sleep through a thunderstorm. Jonah slept being oblivious to what was happening just above his head, just like how when I was a kid, I was oblivious to what was happening above my head during a thunderstorm. There was this storm outside where he slept. What kind of storms are you sleeping through? What kind of storms has God used in the past or even the present to get your attention? What branches have fallen in your path with your walk with God? When these storms happen, listen to God and listen good. Because that storm is here to reveal something to you, to show you something, to soften your hardened heart, to wake you up as a sleeping Christian, to change the way you think and view the world. No matter how far you go, you can never outrun God. You can never get away from God. When God calls on you, listen to God and listen good. I keep hitting my ring on the stand whenever I'm moving my hands. The sailors had no idea why this storm was happening, and when their prayers to their gods came back empty, they turned to the one man sleeping and doing nothing. Who are you? They shouted. Pray to your God and have him save us. Now, Jonah was a prophet, there's no doubt about that, but when he told the sailors that he was a prophet, they must have been terrified. I've been shaken up or scared before in my life. Someone swerving into my lane without signaling, going on a roller coaster when I was younger at Six Flags, asking a girl out to homecoming, asking Erica to marry me, preaching for the first time, having my first solo in jazz band, having my first solo for solo ensemble in band. Those did not compare to how the sailors must have felt when Jonah told him his occupation. Listen to God and listen good. So let's read the next two verses, verse 9 and verse 10. Verse 9, Jonah answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. The sailors were terrified when they heard this, for he had already told them he was running away from the Lord. Oh, why did you do it? They groaned. Jonah told the sailors what his occupation was. He was a prophet, and he said that he worshiped the Hebrew God. Hebrew means one who crosses over. We have seen in the Bible many times Hebrews crossing over something, crossing into the promised land, crossing over the Red Sea, or I guess splitting the Red Sea, and crossing that. He said, I worship the Lord in this translation, while other translations say, I fear the Lord. Jonah could have just stopped at worshiping or fear the Lord, but he goes on to say another title and explains it a little more. The God of heaven, the one who made the sea and the land. Jonah wanted to show that the Lord, the one Jonah worships, can save them from this storm. Not the gods that the sailors were invoking, but the one Jonah emphasized, the maker of the universe. After he told the sailors The sailors were struck with fear, and they only asked the logical question that they could think of. Why have you done this? That is the only logical question someone could ask at a time like this. I can only imagine what it must have felt like being told that this man who was on the boat is the reason why there's a horrible storm, because he tried running away from God. But that's the irony about this situation. That's the satire about this situation. Jonah tried to run away from God, but Jonah knows he can't escape the eyes of his own God, who, by his confession, is the God of heaven, the sea, and the land. Jonah's attempt to run away from God seemed quite foolish and quite humorous. In your life, can you think of a time when you acted in a way now that seems foolish, considering what you know about God? Maybe it was not going to church one Sunday. Maybe it was running away to a park whenever your mom said no. What is it about human nature that causes us to run from God, even though we know in the back of our minds, we know God will not leave us alone because he is omniscient, because he is omnipresent. He knows where we are at all times. He is with us at all times. And that's the other example of satire here. These pagan sailors who are crying out to God and desperately looking for a reason behind the storm that threatens them. When storms hit your life, when branches fall in your path with your walk with God, do you cry out to God? Or do you attempt to rely on something else? Whenever you fall down on that path and God is reaching out for you, do you accept his hand, or do you look for something else? Now, raise your hand if you've ever played hide and seek. Okay, raise your hand if you have not played hide and seek. Okay, good. Good. If somebody raised their hand, then I would have said, I'm playing hide and seek with you after church. I practiced that. I rehearsed it. I practiced. But we've all played hide and seek. We've played hide and seek with our siblings, with our children, with our nephews, with our nieces, with our grandchildren. With our husband or wife playing hard to get. Maybe even with a dog, if you've done that. That is impressive if you played hide and seek with your dog. But it's so funny seeing these kids hide, especially the younger they are, the funnier it is to play hide and seek with them, because they hide in such common places. They hide behind the curtains. They hide in the cupboard. They hide in the pantry. They hide behind the piano. They don't even hide. They just sit on the couch. It's so funny seeing that because it's so easy to find them. And then whenever you play with them so often, you know their hiding spot. You know that they hide under the blankets. You know that they hide in the closet. You know that they hide in the bathroom. Jonah was playing a huge, elaborate game of hide and seek with God. But the only problem with that is that there was no place to hide. So Jonah got up and ran the opposite direction of Nineveh, got on a boat and wanted to leave, but God said, ready or not, here I come. Listen to God and listen good. And when you find that child, they either say, what? You found me. Or they say, no fair, you cheated. Mm-hmm. Out of those two responses, can you guess which one Jonah said? What, you found me, or no fair? It's pretty easy because there's only two options. If you don't know, then let's continue on, verses 11 through 16. And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, what should we do to you to stop the storm? Throw me into the sea, Jonah said, and it will become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault. Instead, the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to the land, but the stormy sea was too violent for them, and they couldn't make it. Then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. "O Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sin, and don't hold us responsible for his death. O Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." Then the sailors picked Jonah up and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. That is so ironic. Jonah, a Jew, where in that time Jews were not very good at being at sea, went on a boat because he believed being on a boat in the middle of the sea could hide him away from God. Why did that have such a rhythm to it? Let me say that again in case you didn't pick up that rhythm. Ironic. Jonah, a Jew, where in that time Jews were not very good at being at sea, went on a boat because he believed being on the boat in the middle of the sea could hide him away from God. I'm sorry, that just boggles my mind how that had such a rhythm to it. That's like there was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. That just came up in my mind. That interesting. The sailors wanted the storm to stop, and they would do almost anything. Even pray to the deity they did not worship. That's how desperate they were. Jonah suggested to throw him overboard, not as a human sacrifice, but so Jonah would be murdered and not commit suicide. God does not accept human sacrifices. Never do we hear about God being pleased one of his children was sacrificed for him. When Isaac was about to be sacrificed by his father Abraham, an angel stopped him. When Jesus was on the cross paying for all our sins, God for the first time looked away. Jonah would rather be murdered than to throw himself overboard. Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Now, we don't know exactly how Jonah said that. We don't know if he said it sorrowfully, with a stutter, happily. But we don't know how he said that. All we know is that he said that. Pick me up and throw me into the sea. The sailors didn't listen to Jonah because they didn't want to throw this man overboard. So instead, they rowed even harder, trying to get back to land. But at this time, they were possibly miles away from land, miles away from the shore. The sailors then believed that God truly existed, and they feared the consequences of throwing this prophet overboard. But when they saw that rowing would be futile, they prayed to God, asking to save themselves and to forgive them of what they were about to do, and threw Jonah overboard. And at that moment, the storm stopped. The immediate stop of the storm proved that Jonah's God did exist, and that Jonah's retaliation to God was the problem. The sailors went from fearing the storm because they wanted to live to fearing God because God caused and stopped the storm. They then vowed to serve him. But the vow of the sailors came after they were already delivered. And from that, there are some commentators that believe that the sailors came to true faith in God from that moment. What does Jonah's confession reveal about his heart? What does it take for you to acknowledge your disobedience? When you are wrong or do something bad, how easy is it for you to admit you are wrong? Jonah went through a lot trying to hide, trying to get away from God. But that was futile. It was humorous. It was funny. It was ironic. Listen to God and listen good. After I went to that park, played on the swing set, or played on that merry-go-round, I was in so much trouble when my mom came around with the van. I didn't want to get off, but by the tone of her voice, it sounded like she had the wrath of God in her. She could have spanked me. She could have told me that I don't get any snacks next time we stop for gas. She could have told me that I'm grounded when we get home, but she didn't say any of that. My siblings got out of the van, went to the bathroom. Then we all got in the van and went on our merry way. I ran away, granted, only a few hundred feet, to a playground because I wanted to do something fun and not sit in the back of a van doing nothing. Jonah ran away because he was afraid. He was afraid of his responsibility. He was afraid of what to do. He didn't want to go to Nineveh, and instead he ran across the land, got on a boat, and from that he was tossed into the sea. Sometimes we feel like we run away from God when he calls us to pick up our cross or to do something we're not used to. Sometimes he might call us to go to Nineveh, but we don't want to do that. We run and we run, trying to get away from the responsibility. But the truth is, God didn't choose you because of how capable and how responsible or amazing you are. God chose you because he knows you're the only capable one to handle this job that he is giving you. If you feel like God is calling you to give, to serve, we can help with that. If you feel like God is calling you to dedicate or rededicate your life, myself or Aaron can talk to you after the service. Listen to God and listen good. If you all would bow your heads with me.